Hello Executives， 我们限时特训写作补强专班的 package 已经上线了。那这个 package 呢，只会卖到12月31号，所以如果你想要马上享用所有20多个小时的课程讲义，再加上明年的3堂写作课程的朋友们，那就赶快行动，连结就在我们下面的 show notes. So see you guys in class.Email 的定义就是用写来沟通讯息，但我们最不希望发生的事情就是让读者困惑，或者是感到误会。今天的单元我们就收集了12个 email 最大的禁忌。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast.我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. Email writing is something that everyone has to do, and there's a million pieces of information on the internet, but it still seems to be something that we need to come back to and talk about a few fundamentals to make your emails better.So today, we're bringing you 12 things that you can follow, and we're breaking them into 3 categories that with just a few quick fixes or adjustments, your emailing game can be much better.
那因为明年1月开始，我们就会推出了一系列写作的课程的 premium 课程。那当然我就开始做了一些 research。然后我也发现到，当我在做 research 的时候，就看到也蛮多专家提出了，我们平常在写 email 或者是在写讯息的时候，可能会出现了什么样的一些错误。那这些错误可能自己也习惯了，但是呢，它会造成一些误会。所以我就把这些收集起来，然后放了，希望今天带给大家12个我们尽量要避免的，当然这12个也当做一个很好的提醒。
The first category that we want to cover are just the basics. Now, some of these may sound intuitive or something you've heard over and over again, but they really are worth coming back to and discussing a little bit more. And the first one is simply, you really need to check the length of your email. Whether you're going too long or you're including too much information, and this really needs to be a different email.
没错，因为其实现在大家我们看 email 可能不是只有在 laptop 上面，都是 on your phone。那我们的手机这个萤幕就是这么的大，我们不希望 email 它太长，让这个读者必须一直要 keep scrolling。那当然他如果要keep scrolling 的话，他就会马上觉得 OK, I don't want to read this right now， 那可能就会完全的遗忘，完全忘记掉这一封 email 了。So definitely make your email as concise, as clear as possible。 那当然这个我们在 Premium 1月的课程，我们就会比较仔细的去讨论说，我们到底可以用什么样子的技巧，能够让我们的写作更简洁更有力。但是我觉得第一个 make sure it's not too long and don't put too much information on that.And
there's an additional practical reason from just that people don't want to read really long emails. But the other half of that is when you have too many topics in a single email, it makes them very, very hard to search for. Anyone who has had to go back through their email and find a particular topic or a particular contract will usually start searching in the Google bar. Well, what happens when you have like 3 or 4 things happening in an email is that it's very hard for people to narrow down the actual information they need. So actually even sending multiple emails covering different topics makes it so that when someone or even you need to go back and find that particular discussion, it's much more straightforward.
So speaking of traceable, 我觉得这个是现代人，因为我们每一天都会收到大量的 email， 所以 searching or tracing information 变成非常的重要。我相信很多人有的时候找可能是上周的 email 或者是上个月的 email， 你就必须要去 search 一下，因为你也不知道是什么时候寄的。It's way too many emails to kind of get through. So 这个时候呢，我们不只是在我们内容里面一定要注意，一定要让它非常的focused， 在我们的 subject line， 也就是主旨的地方，我们要很小心，让它比较具体的，然后就陈列出这个 email 到底是在说什么，以便你之后或者是让对方能够做他的 Google search.
Throughout these first two examples of looking at the length of your email, one topic, and also keeping a very clear subject line, you can get a sense that you should have at the top of your mind, when I'm emailing, this should not just be one letter that I sent out, but it's more like a recorded conversation that you can always go back and reference. And if you think about it in those terms, it becomes easier to consider how to structure your subject lines, how to structure your emails so that people can always go back and find the information they need. Speaking of not being vague, getting into this next piece, which is not personalizing your greeting. Unfortunately, a lot of people lean back on a very old email practice of starting with "to whom it may concern" or "dear sir and madam." This is fine back when it's a little bit harder to see who you're contacting or figure out who you may be reaching out to. But the reality is today with social networks, especially things like LinkedIn, it's almost never where you don't know who you are trying to talk to. The only time that I can see where it may be a blank page is if you're reaching out to customer support. Then there's probably a team or it's outsourced. But the reality is if you're applying for a job, if you're trying to contact someone in a company, you're trying to reach out and make a connection, you can almost always find, whether it's through a website, a professional network, etc., who you should be reaching out to. So there's no reason to have a blank greeting line. You should always have a personalized greeting line.
那下一个呢，也就是 forgetting to explain the attachments. I have to say, I probably forgot to explain the attachments a few times because I kind of assumed people would know why I'm attaching the information or what it is about, 尤其是你可能已经跟这个人 exchange email 几次了。那我觉得这个部分真的还是要小心一点点，虽然好像每个人都一定会做到的事情。But 有的时候我们还是会忘记 and it's really important to explain why you're attaching a document and what that document actually entails.
Also, in an age of spammers or scammers, sometimes when you just see a random attachment, but when you look through the email, you don't have a clear reason why there's attachment, you're very unlikely to download it. And conventional wisdom would be don't download it because if you don't know what it is, you don't want to open it on your computer. So by being clear about what the attachment is, and I think this becomes more of a problem, as Sherry said, whether it's a cold email or whether it's someone who wants to make an introduction, but they don't explicitly say like, okay, here's a brochure or here's a proposal, here's a little bit more information. And then you just randomly see like attachment.
Yeah.
But they're just introducing themselves or you don't know enough information to assume that, oh yeah, I should just open this because it's your company brochure, etc.
And I have to add this. 如果这个人是你第一次 email 的一个 client 或者是上司好了, don't attach too many files. I would go for one. Just start with one thing, right? And if they reply, then you can attach other files that's related. 但是我发现有很多这种就是一次大概 attach 4-5个, 4 or 5 documents, and it's so overwhelming. Even if they explained it, it makes the email so long and it's so overwhelming to like go to each file and to look at what it is.
Right. And the assumption is if they don't care enough to open the first file, they're not going to open all the files. So give them a really good reason to want to open the first file, have a follow-up conversation, and then you can continue sending them relevant information.
那下一个部分呢，我们就来到了 professionalism， 也就是很多人会犯的一些错误，这些错误会让你听起来或者是读起来不是非常的专业。And the first one, it's my favorite one, which is annoying punctuations.
Yes, unfortunately, so many people treat their email threads like it is a line or text message chain to their friends. And so punctuation or even abbreviations really need to be limited in a professional email context. So avoid using like multiple exclamation marks or multiple question marks for two reasons. One, email is still considered a more professional format. It's just good practice. Even though you probably email your friends or your family over time, it's good practice to keep a more professional tone simply from the standpoint that this is a professional tool that you can also use in other capacities. The other reason to avoid these is they convey a certain tone. Anytime you use multiple exclamation marks or question marks, it actually conveys a tone of annoyance.
Or impatience. 尤其是你问一个问题，然后后面接了一大堆的问号，就好像听起来这个人不是非常的有耐心，好像 I need an answer right now. But no one wants that, right? No one appreciates that kind of sentiment.
And if you really need to convey annoyance, consider better word choice, not using multiple punctuations.
Now, the next one is being too casual. Now, I think this is a bit tricky. 我觉得通常我所看到在台湾的上班族所写的 email， 不会有太多的人会犯像这样子的错误 like being too casual， 或可能就是like call someone like dude or tell a joke. 没有太多的人会去尝试。但是呢，某一些人可能会觉得说，诶，我平常写 email 听起来都差不多。I want to try out something different, and I'm going to be a little bit more fun this time. 但是当你想要做这个小小的实验的时候，你还是要很小心，对方他可能是客户，或者是他可能是你的上司。Maybe they don't really appreciate that kind of tone.
I would also bring it to the point that in a professional context, you also have to consider that at some point, maybe if you're talking to a supplier and you have built a good relationship with them, but maybe they have to send that email to a boss or forward a link around. And so it would be really awkward for them to just be like, oh, let me send my supervisor or my boss forward the email with the information. And it's like, yo, bro, here's that contract that you needed. Hit me back, right? In that case, it gets weird. Now, we definitely encourage that you should build relationships with people. You don't have to be too formal. So you can switch out like, hi, Sherry, instead of dear Sherry, so that you can feel a little bit more personable and build a connection with them. But you also have to see a limit in which, again, in a professional context, if someone else sees this email, are they going to view the person you're talking to as unprofessional, even though they're not the one who wrote it?
The next one is really funny. It's the ridiculous email address. And the first example I have to say, it's like I actually talked to a client. Well, it wasn't really my client at the time, but he was showing me this deck that he was going to send to investors. And guess what? In his email address was handsome and then his name, handsome someone at gmail.com. And I was going to be like, oh my God, please don't send that.
Now, we all understand. Probably the first email address, well, that tells our age a little bit, that I had was back in high school.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people now probably get their first email address when they were in junior high, maybe a little bit earlier. And so, yeah, you have fun with it and you put in what you care, what you like about that.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if your email address has not changed since you went into the professional working world, now is the time. And the easiest thing to do is put your name somehow in your email address. Especially, I think in Taiwan, this is a little bit easier because if you put your English name, period, your Chinese name, and then like your last name, it's actually really unlikely someone else has that email address. And you can almost get a very professional looking email without trying very hard.
Yeah, I think it's really true. I can imagine that if your name is John Smith, you're probably not going to get it johnsmith@gmail.com. But obviously, if we're Asian and sometimes we do have our family names, yeah, you can definitely create something that's more authentic. You might need to add some numbers, but make sure the numbers is like not so long, because I've also seen emails like, let's say H90321, and then just keeps going. And then gmail.com. No one will associate that with like a real person.
Right. Imagine that you have this very complicated, and I see this all the time on resumes, which blows my mind. Imagine you have this really complicated thing and someone wants to send you an acceptance letter. Why are you making their life hard? Don't make their life hard.
Like, what's your name? H9023.
Yeah, like, dear. I mean, maybe that's a way to stop spammers from be like, dear Mr. 9H36QR, right? So you know it's fake. But really, email address.
Yeah.
It's so easy to have a professional sounding one. Gmail is free.
So the next one is using ambiguous language. This is interesting. So actually, Nick, would you give us an example? What would sound like an ambiguous language?
Ambiguous language would be something like, we are somewhat interested in your idea, and we think in the future we could possibly set a meeting appointment to discuss other plans.
我们之前好像讲过这种类似的 downgraders, right? 就是 maybe, possibly, perhaps 很多类似像这样子的语言，让你的句子听不出来到底是 is that a yes or is that a no? What are you asking?
Anytime someone reads your email and they either A, don't really understand what you're doing, or B, they're considering like 17 different possibilities of what the outcome is, that's not ideal, especially when it comes to our earlier points of make it clear, make it concise. Someone should be able to read your email, get in and get out. Yeah. But if they read it and they're like, maybe we'll have a meeting in the future, then of course their next thing is going to be a follow-up email and be like, is there a specific time or day? Is that a yes? Is that a no? And now you end up with this 17 email chain back and forth where you're just clarifying something where you could have simply said, we're interested in your project. Can we meet on these days? Or thank you for your time, but we're really not going to go forward with the project right now.
Employing ambiguous language are just going to get you in a lot of trouble. 很类似的，也就是下一个 using jargons。Jargon 也就是我们所谓的这种很专业的用词，但千万不要 assume 每个人都知道你在说什么，因为呢，常常呢读到的人，他可能本身就不知道你在说什么，或者他不是很熟悉，或者是他必须要 forward 给他的老板，给他其他同事，那这个又更麻烦了 because they need to explain what that jargon actually means.
Right. If you're in a supplier to procure a relationship, or you're engineer R&D to R&D. Yeah, sure. Be professional, say what you need to say. But again, in the context of maybe first contact or trying to build a relationship with someone, dropping a lot of jargon words you may assume sounds very professional or I sound very smart. But the truth is, if the other person is not quite sure what you want or what you're in discussion about, then they'll probably just deprioritize the email. They may get to it, but it's not going to be the first thing they get to. They're going to get to the email they can take action on immediately.
Now the next category, which is tone, 也就是我们写作的时候的语气. Now, the first one is being curt. 那 curt 基本上就是太 direct, 太直接了。Because sometimes 我们觉得我要直接，可是这个直接跟 rude 又要怎么去拿捏？ It's actually a balancing act.
So we said earlier that you shouldn't be too long with your emails. But if someone emails you and your response is just no.
Sincerely, Sherry.
Right. This is not a good way to set up a long-term relationship, or doesn't leave any room for discussion.
Yeah.
You can be direct and just be like, we're really not interested in this time. In fact, I recently got an email where someone was trying to interview me and put me into a magazine publication. but the deadline just didn't make sense for me. So I didn't write a long email back. I just simply responded, I appreciate the opportunity, but it's not something I can prioritize at this time. Thank you. And then they just responded back as, oh, that's okay. Let me know if you have time in the future. That's a whole exchange. It was polite, but in the reality is I'm not going to go back and do it. But if I had just emailed back like, stop bothering me. No.
No, I don't have time.
Right.
Because in this way now, you can create more opportunity in the future, right?
Yeah, maybe in the future I find out that that publication is worth my time being in. I can go back and say something like, oh, I have more time in my schedule. I would love to discuss it. But if I had just responded, no, then how do I go back?
Exactly.
Like, hey, you know how I said no, what I meant, right?
Yeah.
So leave that door open. Being curt, or the second one actually, being snippy. Passive aggressive. Leave passive aggressiveness out of your emails, please.
被动式攻击. Yeah, we talked about that before.
It's important that you just kind of manage your emotions or avoid sounding rude so that people are willing to keep a door open of communication.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, yes, it's annoying. Yes, sometimes we get so frustrated with certain clients or a certain exchange, and we can't help it but to feel really annoyed. Not letting that spill all over your email, that's going to be a bit of a challenge, but a necessary task for anyone who's working. 所以在这个部分呢，我们在3月的时候呢 ，Premium 课程也会来 touch on 这个 how to emote more professionally.
The last one is don't be too stiff. Don't sound like a robot.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
The easiest way to get a sense is if you're doing this is if you sound like Elon Musk on stage. This is bad. Elon Musk is fine in text on Twitter. He's actually pretty well spoken, even though people give him a lot of crap. But if your email ever sounds like what Elon Musk looks like when he's talking on stage, don't be a robot. Do better.
Yeah, and this happens a lot. You get a lot of cold emails, I'm sure. And that always sounds so robotic. 因为他们就是 copy and paste, right? And it changed like dear, whatever the name is. Then that just sounds like a robot. It doesn't sound like a real person.
Well, we hope that you enjoyed these 12 quick tips on email writing. Any of these are something that you can fix in a matter of minutes and really upgrade the quality of your emails. If you have any questions or if you have any more tips that you really enjoy and want to spread the word on email, find us on social media, Executive Plus Facebook, Communication R&D Instagram. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.